Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Kris. This is what Civil War generals think of each other. Not a whole lot I can add because I don't know what they're talking about. Click on there, click on that. That helps me out. There's a thanks button. You can click on that, donate to the channel. All right. Okay, this is from the movie Lincoln. That's Grant, and I recognize that. That is Robert Todd Lincoln. Yeah, this is from the movie. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Let's get into it.
Despite the ongoing war and being enemies, many generals spoke respectfully of their opponents. Today, we're going to discover what famous US Civil War figures thought of each other. Write in the comments what you think of these generals. Ulysses S. Grant about Robert E. Lee.
I never ranked Lee as highly as some others of the Army. That is to say, I never had as much anxiety when he was in my front as when Joe Johnston was in my front.
Yeah, he respected Joe Johnston. Joe Johnston didn't get out of the way of so you can get an idea if you don't know what Robert E. Lee looks like. Joe Johnston was somebody who looked at every battle in terms of is this even winnable? Because if it wasn't winnable, why fight it? Robert E. Lee would not necessarily look at it that way. He would look at it like, well, if we can fight here and kill 10,000 of their guys, that's a great day. But if you lose 3,000, they can replace those 10,000 in the Union side. You may only get 1,000 back. And then the next time you lose 3,000, you may only get 750. Joe Johnston looked at it in terms of the advantage. Robert E. Lee didn't. Grant also said something about one of the, was it a Union soldier? Oh. By the way, he said that about Joe Johnston in his own memoirs. Grant. But he said something about another soldier or another general. I don't remember which side it was, but he said that this person I don't remember the quote. It wasn't a good quote. Like this person thinks they're good, and I would encourage them to like stay in a position of leadership because that would help everyone else that fights them. Yeah, I'm butchering the quote. I just don't remember. It was such a good smackdown quote, though.
Lee was a good man who had everything in his favor. He was a man who needed sunshine. He was supported by the unanimous voice of the South. He was supported by a large party in the North. He had the support and sympathy of the outside world.
Jefferson Davis also loved him. And because he had turned down the Union leadership, Jefferson Davis loved him. And I'm not going to say this lightly, babied him a little bit, gave him what he wanted. And then when he put him in charge of fighting, I think it was a whole different animal. Robert E. Lee was good, but he really does get more credit than he deserves. And that's not a slight at him, because if he was on the Union side, it would be the same thing. He would get more credit than he deserved.
All this is of immense advantage to a general. Lee had this in a remarkable degree. Everything he did was right. He was treated like a demigod. Our generals had a hostile press, lukewarm friends, and a public opinion outside. The cry was in the air that the North only won by brute force, that the generalship and valor were with the South. This has gone into history with so many allusions that are historical. Lee was of a slow, conservative, cautious nature, without imagination or humor, always the same with grave dignity. I could never see in his achievements what justifies his reputation. The illusion that nothing but heavy odds beat him will not stand the ultimate light of history. I know it is not true. Lee was a good deal of a headquarters general, a desk general from what I hear, and from what his officers say. He was almost too old for active service, the best service in the field. At the time of the surrender, he was 58 or 59, and I was 43. His officers used to say he posed himself, that he was retiring and exclusive, and that his headquarters were difficult of access.
Grant about Stonewall Jackson.
From all I know of Jackson and all I see of his campaigns, I have little doubt of the result. If Jackson had attempted on Sheridan the tactics he attempted out of the... From all I know...
I had to go back because I accidentally put myself. So, I mean, Grant knows Lee better than I do. But I think in a way Lee was put in a terrible circumstance. And he was, as he said, he was treated like a demigod, which is true. But I think that had he stayed with the North, he wouldn't be viewed the same. Because Grant was viewed as a butcher. You have to remember. And you're also talking about the lost cause myth, which ramps up Lee and pushes down Grant.
Were difficult of access.
Grant about Stonewall Jackson.
From all I know of Jackson and all I see of his campaigns, I have little doubt of the result. If Jackson had attempted on Sheridan the tactics he attempted so successfully upon others, he would not only have been beaten, but destroyed. Sudden, daring raids under a fine general like Jackson might do against raw troops and inexperienced commanders, such as we had in the beginning of the war, but not against drilled troops and a commander like Sheridan.
Stonewall Jackson was really good and successful early in the war, but he had the 7 Days Battle, other things like that, where it was just kind of like, that's not the Stonewall Jackson I know. And potentially every single general is going to have an up and a down. Grant wasn't perfect. Every general has an up and a down. Ups and downs. That's what I'm trying to say. That doesn't... They're ebbs and flows of war. Jackson dying kept him elevated. Robert E. Lee loved him, kept him elevated. Had he continued with the war, I think you would have started to see flaws. Phil Sheridan was Sheridan, William Tecumseh Sherman, Grant. Those three got along so well. I don't know. And the three of them, by the way, none of them died. Stonewall Jackson died. That hurt Lee. Jeb Stuart, was it Jeb Stuart died? Jeb Stuart died. Another person under Lee. Lee lost people that were significant to him, which is another thing that also hurts Lee, because the people that took the place didn't necessarily do maybe what Lee liked or what he not agreed with. They didn't carry the war the way they knew Lee would. But Sheridan and Sherman were always there. So that also helped Grant.
The tactics for which Jackson is famous and which achieved such remarkable results belonged entirely to the beginning of the war and to the peculiar conditions under which the earlier battles were fought.
The end of the war became more trench warfare, siege battles against Lee and stuff like that. Earlier, cavalry, all kinds of stuff, because it was the whole war was let me go this way so you can kind of look at it. This is DC, and this is like Alabama, and then all of a sudden it just kind of starts coming like this, right? Grant is going west. Going east. And eventually the war, there were other Confederates out and about, but the war slims down to kind of surround Lee, and he kind of knew that was happening. And he didn't have a Stonewall Jackson to do things for him. So it eventually was not going to work for the Confederate.
They would have ensured destruction to any commander who tried them upon Sherman, Thomas, Sheridan, Meade, or in fact, any of our great generals.
I forgot about George Gordon Meade. I wasn't even thinking about him. And then Thomas. What was his first name? Was that George Thomas? No. Thomas saved a bunch of people at the First Battle of Chickamauga. Oh, Thomas, I am so sorry. I forgot your first name. He was another guy that under Grant, and Grant was to the point where he thought, do I have to replace him? And then boom, Thomas would fight. And it was like, there's the guy I needed.
Consequently, Jackson's fame as a general depends upon achievements gained before his generalship was tested, before he had a chance of matching himself with a really great commander. No doubt so able and patient a man as Jackson, who worked so hard at anything he attempted, would have adapted himself to new conditions and risen with them. He died before his opportunity.
Grant about George McClellan.
McClellan is to me one of the mysteries of the war. He had the way of inspiring you with the idea of immense capacity, if he would only have a chance.
But then he would lead you into battle and disappoint you. McClellan trained people. So McClellan at the time could take a person and make him a soldier. And he was fantastic at that. And I will never besmirch his name for that. Ever. Phenomenal to turn you into a soldier. His problem was that he turned so many people into soldiers, and they loved him, that when it came to a battle, he loved those men so much, and I truly believe he did, that he didn't want to risk losing any of them because he did love them. But sometimes you have to, even a parent, you have to raise your kids and then send them out so that they can be their own people. You have to teach these people to be soldiers and then let them go soldier. And McClellan always wanted to keep his hand on them, never wanted them to be in harm's way. Losing a soldier devastated him. And that is where his command failed. I know this sounds brutal, but in war you have to be willing to lose people, soldiers, even if you trained them, even if you love them, because that's what war is. War is brutal. And McClellan loved his men too much to do that. He should have been put in charge of, let's say, West Point, and just brought people up to be soldiers. And once they were ready, they ship off and a new class comes in. So he's always getting new people. He's always getting this love that he needs, building them up, shipping them out. But I could see him also falling apart after that mentally, because he's losing all these people that he's grown to love. And he knows that they're dying. McClellan, for that aspect, was a phenomenal person. Tactician on the field, I would myself want to beat him to death because he was terrible at that. He was not good.
Then he is a man of unusual accomplishments, a student, and a well-read man. I have never studied his campaigns enough to make up my mind as to his military skill, but all my impressions are in his favor. I have entire confidence in McClellan's loyalty and patriotism. But the test which was applied to him would be terrible to any man, being made a major general at the beginning of the war. It has always seemed to me that the critics of McClellan do not consider this vast and cruel responsibility. The war, a new thing to all of us, the Army knew, everything to do from the outset with a restless people and Congress. McClellan was a young man when this devolved upon him, and if he did not succeed, it was because the conditions of success were so trying. If McClellan had gone into the war as Sherman, Thomas, or Meade had fought his way along and up, I have no reason to suppose that he would not have won as high a distinction as any of us.
Grant about Ambrose Burnside.
You know what? That is completely fair. And again, Grant would know better if he doesn't. I'm looking back as a, what is it? Armchair quarterback. So I'm looking at the fact of some of the battles that he did. But if Grant says it wasn't, he can't make a good judgment, then who the hell am I? So I take back what I said. Had he been forged in the fire of coming up, maybe it's different. Was he a good trainer of men? I will never disagree with that. But I'll defer to Grant on this one because, and Ambrose Burnside. I mean, just look at that mustache. Look at the mutton chops.
General Burnside was an officer who was generally liked and respected. He was not, however, fitted to command an army. No one knew this better than himself. He always admitted his blunders and extenuated those of officers under him beyond what they were entitled to. It was hardly his fault that he was ever assigned to a separate command.
Grant about Gideon Pillow.
I'm not saying Pillow would shoot himself. I believe, however, that he would report himself wounded if he received a minor scratch.
Yep. Pillow was not. I'm not a fan of Pillow. Burnside, I think it's a bit unfair to judge him negatively because Burnside was a patriot, but he was put in a position more by force than by the merit of his situation. And think about this in sports. You have a quarterback, right? Football. You have a quarterback. You know that this guy is not worth the contract that you're going to give him, right? A 5-year, $250 million deal. You're paying him $50 million a year. He's not worth it. Wait a minute, 5 for 250. Yeah, okay. 5-year, 250. You know he's not worth a $50 million, but everyone that's available, they're worth maybe $20. They're not worth they're not better than this guy. But this guy, he ain't it. So what are you going to do? Are you going to try to take somebody off basically like off the street and put them in a position and say, do your best? No. You're going to try to do what you can to elevate this person that doesn't deserve it to that point and just hope it works out. And that was Burnside to me. Not fair at him at all. I'm not going to bash him because in that situation, I probably would have been the Ambrose Burnside of my situation.
Grant about James Longstreet.
Longstreet was an entirely different man. He was brave, honest, intelligent, a very capable soldier, subordinate to the superiors, just and kind to his subordinates, but jealous of his own rights, which he had the courage to maintain. He was never on the lookout for a slight, but saw one as soon as anybody when intentionally given. It may be that Longstreet was not sent to Knoxville for the reason stated, but because Mr. Davis had an exalted opinion of his own military genius and thought he saw a chance of killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Grant about George Custer.
Jefferson Davis really valued himself because he was in the he served under 12th President Zachary Taylor. Was that the Black Hawk War? And I say that because he was in Illinois. He went through, I believe he went through Peoria up to Galena, Illinois. And then he got out of the military so he could marry Zachary Taylor's daughter, who died. She was pregnant, but I think she died before she gave birth. And then he ended up moving on and marrying someone else. But he got out of the military because of that. Secretary of War, was it? With Oh man, was that Franklin Pierce or was that James Buchanan? Anyways, Jefferson Davis really overvalued himself. No offense, Jefferson Davis fans. I've seen the grave. I've seen his grave at Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, and I've seen his boyhood home. The home no longer stands, but in its place, well, near where it stands, is a 90-foot, it looks like Washington Monument, basically.
I regard Custer's massacre as a sacrifice of troops brought on by Custer himself that was wholly unnecessary. Wholly unnecessary.
Grant about Braxton Bragg.
Bragg was a remarkable...
There's a couple things that I've read that Custer was a bit of an arrogant POS, to put it politely. Not saying Grant didn't get along with him, but Grant recognized a headstrong individual and may not have cared about if he had ever lost him to being sent somewhere else. That was what I took from it.
Intelligent and well-informed man, professionally and otherwise. He was also thoroughly upright, but he was possessed of an irascible temper and was naturally disputatious. A man of the highest moral character and the most correct habits, yet in the old army he was in frequent trouble. As a subordinate, he was always on the lookout to catch his commanding officer infringing his prerogatives. As a post commander, he was equally vigilant to detect the slightest neglect, even of the most trivial order. I have heard in the old army an anecdote very characteristic of Bragg. On one occasion, when stationed at a post of several companies commanded by a field officer, he was himself commanding one of the companies and at the same time acting as post quartermaster and commissary. As commander of the company, he made a requisition upon the quartermaster himself for something he wanted. As quartermaster, he declined to fill the requisition and endorsed on the back of it his reasons for so doing. As company commander, he responded to this, urging that his requisition called for nothing but what he was entitled to, and that it was the duty of the quartermaster to fill it. As quartermaster, he still persisted that he was right. In this condition of affairs, Bragg referred the whole matter to the commanding officer of the post. The latter, when he saw the nature of the matter referred, exclaimed, "My God, Mr. Bragg, you have quarreled with every officer in the army, and now you are quarreling with yourself."
Grant about Abraham Lincoln.
The president is one of
He hated Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people don't know that. Let's see.
the few visitors I have had who have not attempted to extract from me a knowledge of my movements,
By the way, that was a joke. He loved Abraham Lincoln.
although he is the only one who has a right to know them. The greatest I have ever known, and the day of his death, the darkest of my life.
On a side note, I just realized he has like a little mole there. And so did he. Man, when you look at this, Lincoln's eyes really seem sunk in, don't they? Seems like just right in through here, his eyes really sink in. Grant's not so much. He looks a lot older than he is here, too. Man. Ugh.
Grant about Joseph Johnston.
My own just death.
Let me
only
go
one
back. I'm
who
sorry. I'm going to go back to do what he said with Lincoln.
Grant about Abraham Lincoln.
The president is one of the few visitors I have had who have not attempted to extract from me a knowledge of my movements, although he is the only one who has a right to know them. The greatest I have ever known, and the day of his death, the darkest of my life.
Grant about Joseph Johnston.
My own judgment is that Johnston acted very wisely. He husbanded his men and saved as much of his territory as he could, without fighting decisive battles in which all might be lost. As Sherman advanced, as I have shown, his army became spread out, until if this had continued, it would have been easy to destroy it in detail. I know that Sherman and I were rejoiced when we heard of the change.
Grant about John Bell Hood.
Hood was
Johnston fought with Jefferson Davis all the time, and Davis pulled him off. As soon as that happened, it was like you just lost one of your competent Confederate generals. That's why they were excited.
Were rejoiced when we heard of the change.
Grant about John Bell Hood.
Hood was unquestionably a brave, gallant soldier and not destitute of ability. But unfortunately, his policy was to fight the enemy wherever he saw him, without thinking much of the consequences of defeat.
Grant about Nathan Forrest.
Forrest had
John Bell Hood. Nathan Bedford Forrest was the first KKK leader. Side note. John Bell Hood. Oh. You know when you get a bunch of people mixed up? I believe he lost a leg and an arm. And then he had a cannonball explode near him. He got like a concussion. And his military leadership just pretty much went downhill. And I always wonder if he got like PTSD while he was serving in the war, because he started like questioning his judgment, making bad his mind was all over the place.
had about 4,000 cavalry with him, composed of thoroughly well-disciplined men who under so able a leader were very effective. Smith's command was nearly double that of Forrest, but not equal, man to man, for the lack of successful experience such as Forrest's men had. The fact is, troops who have fought a few battles and won and followed up their victories improve upon what they were before to an extent that can hardly be counted by percentage. The difference in result, if often a decisive victory instead of inglorious defeat. This same difference, too, is often due to the way troops are officered, and for that particular kind of warfare which Forrest had carried on, neither army could present a more effective officer than he was.
Nathan Bedford Forrest also had one of the ugliest statues ever unveiled. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you do see it, it's nightmare-inducing.
Robert E. Lee about William T. Sherman.
Sherman was the most successful of all Union officers in the Civil War. The claims of unbounded license of Sherman's soldiers in Georgia were greatly exaggerated. As a strategist and military commander, Sherman demonstrated the highest order of military genius.
Lee about Ulysses S. Grant.
Where do we get sufficient troops to oppose Grant? He is bringing to him now the 19th Corps, and will bring every man he can get. His talent and strategy consists in accumulating overwhelming numbers. Sir, if you ever presume again to speak disrespectfully of General Grant in my presence, either you or I will sever his connection with this university.
Robert E. Lee's words to a faculty member at Washington College in Lexington, Virginia, after the faculty member had spoken insultingly of Ulysses S. Grant.
As much as Robert E. Lee may not have liked having to surrender to Grant, he respected him. And I think, this is just my opinion on this one, I think Robert E. Lee is looking at Grant as two guys from West Point who both had been through the grind. They'd been through the U.S.-Mexican War. They've been through the Civil War. People tried to tarnish Grant after the war, being a drunk, being this, being that. But I think Lee was trying to just say, hey, look, you can say what you want, but he won. And he did what was necessary. And if you were to put Grant in the Confederacy and Lee in the Union, Union still wins. Because Grant wouldn't have had the people to continue. But I think Grant takes a lot of people with him in terms of fighting. Grant was an aggressive guy. He just kept charging. That's not who Lee was. But it's very cool and respectful that Lee, even if Lee hated it, he respected him.
Lee about Stonewall Jackson.
He has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right. Who can fill his place I do not know. May his spirit be diffused.
Lee about Bedford Forrest. After his surrender, when asked by a Union officer who he thought his greatest general was, General Robert E. Lee replied,
Sir, a gentleman I have never had the pleasure to meet, General Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Lee about John Bell Hood.
Hood,
He never met Bedford Forrest? He did pass along Bedford Forrest. So the original Klan wanted Lee, and Lee passed along the name of Bedford Forrest because Forrest was younger. I didn't realize they'd never met.
is a bold fighter, very industrious on the battlefield, careless off. I have a high opinion on his gallantry, earnestness, and zeal. However, I'm doubtful as to other qualities necessary.
Lee about Jeb Stuart.
He never brought me false information. He was second to none in valor, in zeal, in unflinching devotion to his country. To military capacity of a high order, and all the virtues of the soldier, he added the brighter graces of a pure life.
William T. Sherman.
Jeb Stuart. I'm going to double check. So when I would go and visit my sister when she lived in Virginia, I drove one road to go eat. I drove on Jeb Stuart Drive or something like that. And I just want to see something. Okay, no, that's not it. Jeb Stuart, for a second, I mixed up Jeb Stuart with George Pickett. George Pickett is buried at Hollywood Cemetery. Jefferson Davis, James Monroe, 5th President James Monroe, 10th President John Tyler. It's a bunch of people buried there.
And about Robert E. Lee.
I'm not a hater of Robert E. Lee, as some of our people seem to be. He was a kind, amiable man, had none of the vices usually ascribed to generals, drank no whiskey, smoked no cigars, but had an aversion to swearing. His habits were rather aristocratic, and he was a kind neighbor, a model citizen, and a father to the poor. But he had a reputation that both he and I did not covet.
Sherman about Ulysses S. Grant.
Grant stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk, and now we stand by each other. I will accept no commission that would tend to create a rivalry with Grant. I want him to hold what he has earned and got.
Sherman about Nathan Bedford Forrest.
That devil Forrest must be hunted down and killed if it costs 10,000 lives and bankrupts the federal treasury. After all, I think Forrest was the most remarkable man our Civil War produced on either side.
Abraham Lincoln about Ulysses S. Grant.
Well, I hardly know what to think of him altogether. He's the quietest little fellow you ever saw. Why, he makes the least fuss of any man you ever knew. I believe 2 or 3 times he has been in this room a minute or so before I knew he was here. It's about so all around. The only evidence you have that he's in any place in that he makes things get. Where he is, things move. When Grant took hold, I was waiting to see what his pet impossibility would be, and I reckoned it would be cavalry as a matter of course, for we hadn't horses enough to mount even what men we had. There were 15,000 or thereabouts up near Harper's Ferry, and no horses to put them on. Well, the other day, just as I expected, Grant sent to me about those very men, but what he wanted to know was whether he should disband them or turn them into infantry.
Jefferson Davis about Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. On April 19, 1865, Davis learned Lincoln was dead. He commended,
"Well, General, I don't know. If it were to be done at all, it were better that it were well done. And if the same had been done to Andy Johnson, the Beast, and to Secretary Stanton, the job would then be complete."
George Meade about Ulysses S. Grant.
Grant has undoubtedly shown very superior abilities, and is, I think, justly entitled to all the honors they propose to bestow upon him. I believe Grant is honest and would not deceive me, but I think there is something more than is acknowledged.
Something more that is acknowledged. Grant did not want to remove Meade because he respected the hell out of George Gordon Meade. Who is this right here? Yeah, Grant did when he was elevated, he kept Meade in his position. And when Grant was elevated, Meade had only 2 or 3 days been elevated before Gettysburg. And Grant saw Meade. I mean, prior he knew who Meade was. He saw him as just he's a good leader. And so he kept him there. All right. Well, we're going to end this here. Hope you enjoyed. I apologize for talking a whole lot. So until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.